Rocketeer. Where do I begin? It's a movie I have watched I don't know how many times. I first watched it as a little kid. It was released in 1991, but the way I first saw it was on this VHS tape that my parents recorded off of TV. And honestly, I don't even know what my first memories of it would be, because the whole thing is memorable. And it's a movie that my enjoyment levels have never gone down when I watch it. If anything, they go up every time. Once my family tracked down the official release, we bought that. And then, once I found the DVD, I bought that. And finally, I just had to upgrade it to Blu-ray. If you can't tell, I love this movie. In fairness, this isn't the only movie that has taken a similar route into my collection. You can add most of John Wayne's films and the Indiana Jones series to that list. But what is it about this movie that pulls me and the rest of the huge fan base it has now back, time and time again? That was the question I asked myself when watching it this time around. I'm sure I don't need to explain the plot, but for a brief summary, here goes. Cliff Secord, a young pilot living in the Los Angeles area in 1938, stumbles across a top-secret jetpack, and the mere possession of this object puts him in the crosshairs of the FBI, the mob, a devious Hollywood star, and the Nazis of all things. And when he begins to use it, he gains notoriety as a mysterious figure known as the Rocketeer. No wonder I already loved it as a kid, and it boggles my mind that it wasn't a huge hit back when it first came out. To me, it had everything, even if it wasn't a Western. My loyalty to that genre goes pretty deep, both then and now. But it had tons of action, a funny sidekick, a giant henchman with a penchant for pulling out 245s and blasting away when the going got tough, and a relatable hero with a great costume who could fly, and it even had a blimp. And now, this movie is still at the intersection of so many of my interests. It's set in and around old Hollywood. It has the rousing, adventurous spirit of Indiana Jones or Tintin. It's basically got a gangster movie built into it. It's filled with real stunt work and more practical effects than we typically get anymore. And it has an old-fashioned, good-natured hero at the center of it. And that hero is played by Billy Campbell. He maybe hasn't had the biggest career since The Rocketeer, but I think he is perfectly cast. It was while watching it this time around that it really resonated with me, the type of character he's playing. And the reason for that is it's not the type of character we really get that much these days. Actually, we probably weren't really getting them back in 1991 either. He's not some hard-bitten, wisecracking guy. He acts like what he is. A young man who doesn't particularly want to grow up. He gets an idea in his head and wants to go for it. Whether that be the racing plane he and Peavy have been working on, or whether it's testing out the rocket. He's earnest, he's good-natured, he's plucky. Is that the right word for him? And all of that is so refreshing. We are inundated these days with every kind of tortured, troubled hero. While I don't mind that necessarily, depending on the movie, sometimes you want a true feel-good adventure movie. And that's what this is, first and foremost. Billy Campbell really embodies the character so well. He's got a great look. I think he's 6'4", and he doesn't look like he's been forced to hang out in a gym for a year before filming. He's just a naturally big guy, and you pair that with his kind of wide-eyed innocence at times, and you end up with a very endearing character that you want to root for. He doesn't have an agenda, he's just stumbled upon something incredible, and wants to use it for as long as he can. A very young Jennifer Connelly plays Jenny, the aspiring actress who is also Cliff's girlfriend. They make a great couple, and she too is a great character. Sure, there's the usual conflict of her feeling neglected here because of his love of flying and working on planes, but also, as I said, she has a Hollywood career that she's trying to make a go of, and I enjoyed her storyline and how it all ties in with the larger narrative. This movie introduced me to Alan Arkin, Timothy Dalton, Terry O'Quinn, and Paul Sorvino, and they are all fantastic. Everyone in the movie is. That's something I want to stress. This movie is perfectly cast. The whole thing is populated by a group of actors that understand the type of movie they're in and are clearly loving every minute of it. Alan Arkin is probably one of my favorite characters, especially for the first half of the film, where he is featured most heavily. He and Billy Campbell have amazing chemistry, and the script gives his character of Peavy so many great lines and moments. In particular, the scenes of the two of them testing out the jetpack are always very funny. Anyone who loves the scene of Tony Stark first testing out the thrusters in the first Iron Man film should know the Rocketeer kind of did it first. Timothy Dalton, too, is just great. His character of Neville Sinclair seems modeled after Errol Flynn, likely, in the movie star part of it, not the fact that he's a Nazi spy. But that's one thing I just love, how the movie doesn't try to hide the fact that Sinclair is a bad guy. He's actually introduced in the middle of a discussion with a bunch of gangsters. A lot of movies would have probably tried to save that for some big reveal later on. But here they don't bother. We know what the score is right from the start, and the fun is watching all these various factions running into each other, all on the hunt for the jetpack. Timothy Dalton looks like a classic Hollywood movie star, especially when you put a pencil-thin mustache on him. He exudes confidence and cockiness, and you can see him really sink his teeth into the different sides of this character. You see him fuming and yelling at his mob cronies while pacing around his house with a rapier. And then you see him really laying on the charm when he's trying to romance Jenny later on. I really enjoy the scene where we see both Sinclair and Jenny at work on a film called The Laughing Bandit, I think. The whole set looks like it's straight out of The Adventures of Robin Hood. And seeing that behind-the-scenes view of old Hollywood is always a lot of fun. I also love the touch of how, once it's revealed to our heroes who he's actually working for. For the remainder of the movie, his British accent shifts into a slightly German-tinted English. One thing I wanted to mention is the moment where Neville Sinclair and Jenny arrive at the South Seas Club, and he says hello to both Clark Gable and W.C. Fields. I thought it was so interesting that they chose Clark Gable as one of the celebrities they bump into. It's 1938, so it's a year before Gone with the Wind, where he played Rhett Butler. And who did Timothy Dalton play a few years later? Rhett Butler, in the miniseries sequel, Scarlet. Paul Sorvino as Eddie Valentine, I love that name, really stood out to me this time, in large part because of how straight he plays it. He doesn't go for a caricatured Italian mobster like some of the lower-ranking members of his gang. He's just a businessman, and treats all of the situations he finds himself in as such. While he's technically a villain for most of the movie, I can't help but find him pretty lovable by the end. The way he plays the scene when he finds out about Sinclair's loyalties is also so well done. And he gets the great line, "I may not make an honest buck, but I'm 100% American. I don't work for no two-bit Nazi." So great. And of course, he's a part of what may be my favorite single moment in this movie, where during the climax, fighting has broken out. Sinclair is escaping with Jenny as his hostage. Cliff is about to take off after them, and we cut to Eddie Valentine, side by side with one of the FBI agents, each firing away with a Tommy gun. Suddenly, both men stop, look at each other, and Paul Sorvino gives this perfect little smile, and they go back to shooting. I guess nothing brings people together like fighting the Nazis. Terry O'Quinn, like I said, is great, as Howard Hughes. And so is Margot Martindale as the owner of the Bulldog Cafe that the gang from the airfield hangs out at. Ed Lotter is fun as a particularly temper-prone FBI agent who Cliff decks at least twice. I don't think you're allowed to hit federal agents anymore, regardless if they're being a jerk to you. And I have to mention Eddie Jones, who has a small part as Malcolm, a washed-up pilot who Cliff rescues in his first heroic deed as the Rocketeer. In his few brief scenes, you just get such a great sense of a man who was likely a well-regarded aviator at one point, but now is long past that. Just the look in his eyes gives a view into that history. And this is a minor character, but that's how well crafted this movie is. Speaking of which, I know this has been brought up by others before, but this film is written and plotted so well. Everything in it is set up and makes sense. During the opening scene where Cliff is flying, he flies over a billboard advertising Neville Sinclair's latest movie, setting up this major celebrity. And Cliff and Jenny later go to see that movie. Wings of Honor, I think it's called. It's when they're at the theater to see it that we get our first glimpse of the Zeppelin, which plays a major role in the climax. And why is this gigantic swastika emblazoned airship in the United States? For a tour to promote world peace. It's all explained. Even the chewing gum, which leads to Neville Sinclair's fiery demise, is established in the first scene. There are more, But suffice it to say, everything is set up and pays off. Something else that we don't get that often anymore. And besides all of that, the movie is extremely well paced. I don't think there is a single wasted scene. Everything either drives the story or our character's development forward. It's got terrific momentum and just makes it all the more fun to watch. Although, I do remember as a kid always getting a little restless around the point where Jenny has been chloroformed and wakes up at Neville Sinclair's house. When you're that age, you're thinking, what's going on? Where's the Rocketeer? Let's get back to the action. But of course, it's all necessary. While we knew Sinclair was a bad guy, we didn't know the full story, and it's Jenny that discovers the truth. And before that, it's kind of the completion of Jenny's character arc, where she puts her acting abilities to full use, drawing in Sinclair as this helpless starlet, and then cracking him over the head. As she says, I finally played a scene with Neville Sinclair. That scene in a way reminded me of the scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Marion is wearing the white dress and tries to do not the same type of thing, but a similar act to escape Belloc. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out quite as well. For another Indiana Jones tie-in, the action sequence at the club felt really reminiscent of the opening of Temple of Doom at the Club Obi-Wan. Which one's better? Well, Indiana Jones doesn't get to crash through a stained glass skylight at the end of it, so you be the judge. I like them both. Okay, now on to the score. This is tied with The Mask of Zorro for my favorite James Horner score. No matter how many times I hear it, it never fails to give me chills. As the movie begins, it starts on piano, and then once they're pulling open the hangar doors and the theme slowly comes in, and it hits you with that deep, powerful sound, it gets me every time. And then there's the moment where Cliff buckles on the rocket for the first time, and the theme takes on a more mysterious tone, and the camera pushes in on Alan Arkin's face. And then it goes to a more lighthearted, playful sound, kind of pulpy, and we cut to Cliff and Peavy sawing down the Charles Lindbergh statue. So great. But that heroic theme just comes in at the perfect moments, especially paired with the visuals. This movie has such an iconic, to me at least, hero shot. And you know what I'm talking about. During the climax, the Zeppelin seems to be getting away, and suddenly, look! It's the Rocketeer! And there he is, jetpack and helmet on, a Mauser pistol in his hand, spotlit against the American flag, and they hit the theme full force as he takes off. Man, I gotta get me one of those jackets and helmets. I also love the use of shadows in the movie. I think the first time is in the hospital, when Sinclair's giant henchman Lothar goes to pay a visit to a wounded gangster. And can I just say, Lothar is just great. Played by Tiny Ron, he's listed in the credits. He's got this magnificent face designed by Rick Baker, and his voice has the sound of a steamroller going over gravel. That too, another extremely memorable part of this movie that has always fascinated me. But anyway, he has a habit of bending people in half once he's done interrogating them. And thankfully, this movie spares us that visual. Again, a nice old-fashioned touch. It's always better to hint at it, I think. This shot tells us all we need to know. But when we see him interrogating this gangster in the hospital, it's got this great shot where we see him lifting him up and shaking him, and it's seen in silhouette, but we sure hear the guy screaming. There are two other moments with nice shadow usage, and gives this movie a little noir feel. Another callback that I don't remember noticing previously was the burning flag. Earlier we see the animated Nazi propaganda reel where their plan for jetpack-powered world domination is seen, and it ends with the American flag burning and falling out of frame. But have no fear, after the Rocketeer is done with them, they won't get that far. And how does the climax end? With the swastika at the tail end of the airship smoldering and crashing to the ground. The production design of this movie is so detailed and colorful. I already mentioned the behind-the-scenes look at filming a swashbuckler, but even the airplane hangar and the offices, the house where Cliff and Peavy live. So many little details and interesting things to look for on the walls and shelves. Of course, the whole thing is demolished when Lothar and the FBI stop by. Sinclair's house, with all of those carved, Aztec-looking columns, is so grand and ostentatious, like a 1930s movie star's home would be. And finally, the director was Joe Johnston, and if all of my previous praise hasn't said it, he did a truly amazing job. The whole thing is shot so well, and he tells the story in the most entertaining way. I would assume this movie is why he was chosen to direct Captain America: The First Avenger back in 2011. I have to be honest though, The Rocketeer blows Captain America out of the water. So, if for some reason you haven't seen The Rocketeer, do yourself a favor and watch it today. I think I've made my feelings on it pretty clear, but to summarize, amazing cast, great stunt work, especially some of those aerial scenes, and a magnificent score. I can't recommend this movie highly enough. Thanks so much for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, please check out some of my other reviews over at Hildebrand Productions. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks again, and adios for now.